just hear there's a lot of rumble and a lot of snow, and it's no place you want to be at that time. Just about the one a few weeks ago where the one guy busted his tailbone, but that's all the hearsay you get working at the gas station. But no, I've never been in an avalanche, and I've never seen one except for like on the History Channel or Discovery or something.
So predicting when and where avalanches are going to occur is tricky. Avalanches are an erratic phenomenon. We get certain clues when we travel, we look for certain things in the snow, and then we got to make a decision that'll minimize our risk. We basically have to stick the snow on the terrain in our mind, visualize it, and travel our way through it where we minimize our risk so we're not in the line of fire of an avalanche. 3 big factors of being observant, of being aware. First is common signs of instability. What do we see when we're traveling? What's around us? It's amazing how many people trigger avalanches and then just keep walking right on into the next one. Then there's consideration of the snowpack. What's the structure of the snow below you? Then we're thinking about triggers. What's out there to trigger it? Naturally, the weather. Loading, new snow, wind loading, temperature, stuff like that. Or human triggers, us. Common signs of instability we see, whoops.
Settling of the snow is basically what woofing is. It's, it can happen when you're just on the flats and you're skiing across, skinning or whatever, and you just hear the snow settle, and it's like, makes kind of a woof sound. When you hear that, that's a red light. That means the snow is not stable.
Well, if you're skiing along and you get a whoomp, you'll feel it. You'll feel it, woof, like a little earthquake. It goes straight to your guts. You get a big one, it'll go straight to your bowels. Shooting cracks around our skis. Hollow sounds as we travel. Walking over a hard slab? How does our ski cut the snow? Are we getting a nice sharp edge? Are we triggering anything? You look at your avalanches and you see where are the avalanches occurring, on what aspect, what elevation band, how widespread are they? Is this something isolated or is this something you're seeing all over the mountains?
The obvious clues is something that you can use once you're actually on the trail, and it basically has 7 key questions of things that you should observe when you're out in the backcountry. This acronym ALP-TRUTH, to make it easier for people to remember those 7 clues. A stands for avalanches in the last 48 hours. L stands for loading in the last 48 hours. P stands for path, if you're in an obvious avalanche path. T stands for terrain traps that will make it more severe if you actually got caught in an avalanche here. R stands for rating, whether the rating is considerable or higher currently. U stands for unstable snow. And then TH stands for thaw instability. It's not really a go, no-go decision. It's more about sort of how much experience do you actually need to manage avalanche hazard under these conditions. And generally we say that 2 or less clues present is sort of normal caution. 3 and 4, you want to start to be very careful about your decision making, and then 5 or more, that's a lot of clues, and I think most people should turn around.
So you've got to put all this together now. You've got to sort of think about it as a whole. And you've got to think about what parts are particularly relevant today. An easy winter, funnily enough, is one that you just get storm after storm after storm. Uniform weather, never changes, lots of load. Sure, there's a potential surface instability all the time, but it's a lot easier to pick than a winter that's broken up by small snowfalls, long period of clear weather, windy period, another snowfall, another clear period. When you get those winters that are broken up by sharp changes, then you start to get these tricky layers forming.
It's kind of hard to explain, I guess, but just like to be in there in like on-track POW and just like using all your senses to go down the run like that, and all your senses are, like satisfied at that point with everything that's going on, like you're feeling the snow, you're like seeing the terrain in front of you. you don't just feel the snow like on your skis and stuff, it's like hitting you in the chest, and you know, you're hearing how the snow sounds, you know, like this, I don't know, it sounds kind of crazy, but it can be like a super powerful experience when you have like that day, you know, and everything is like awesome, and that's what gonna get you in trouble as well at some point too, is that wanting to get that feeling, you know.
You got to go back 30 years, but I was working in an air-conditioned office, and that was it. I needed a change, and so I was looking for an application of science that was going to get me outdoors, and this is where I am, and I think it's a pretty good choice. I'm Bruce Jamieson. I direct an avalanche research program at the University of Calgary. I've been doing this for 24 years now, and I'm still learning. I'm learning about snowpack, and I'm learning about terrain. It just takes time. Mother Nature creates layers in the snowpack. Each different snowstorm has slightly different properties, and then sometimes we grow particular kinds of crystals on the snow surface. So each of these different layers, whether they fall out of the sky or form on the snow surface, they then evolve over time and create these different layers within the snowpack. For a slab avalanche, you need some kind of cohesive snow layers, then you have a weak snow layer, and underneath that you need a stiffer snow layer. Sometimes that stiffer snow layer is a crust. And a lot of those crusts form near the surface, either from rain, and we get a rain crust, and we get this hard layer that potentially can form a bed surface when it gets buried in the snowpack. The same thing can happen when the sun hits the slope, warms the slope up until it starts to melt, and then when that freezes, we get this hard layer that is the snow surface, and later when that gets buried, that buried sun crust is potentially the bed surface for slab avalanches. Surface hoar is winter dew, and it cools off at night, and the moisture's got to go somewhere from the sky, and particularly the snow near the ground. It deposits as frost on the snow surface. There's a huge variety of snow crystals that you deal with. This kind's a little bit sparkly, the other kind over there is a little bit chalky, and they all have a different feel to them. And spend a lot of time in the mountains and you learn about these different kinds of layers and snow crystals. The weak layers that form in the snowpack do eventually strengthen. In midwinter, it's normally a process of accumulating more and more snow layers on top, and they gradually push down and they push the crystals together within these previously weak layers. It's a very slow process, especially if the crystals are big, but eventually those weak layers will stabilize, and then we can move on to some slopes we may have been avoiding for a while. Another process happens in the springtime. As the snowpack warms up to 0 degrees, we get a little bit of meltwater forming in the snowpack, and that connects the crystals together, and when that freezes we get a really strong layer. So in the springtime, when the upper part of the snowpack's frozen, you can kick steps, you can go up really steep slopes, you wait till the top few centimeters softens up into corn, and you can rip down that, and you can be fairly confident that you've got a good snowpack and you're not too worried about avalanches.
Change is what it's about. Well, we want to talk about intensity or rate of change in the weather. The faster the rate, the more likely it is to fail. Poking around as you're traveling, you can get some good signs of the snowpack structure. As you step off your skis, does it seem like it supports you and then suddenly you break through? When you're skiing along, is it highly variable? Do you go from top to poof underneath? Or when you're poking along with your pole as you travel, does it break through? So you've got hard over soft. You want to think about that structure. Are there big changes? Big hard layer, soft layer, hard layer. Slab, weak layer, bed surface. When we're traveling, we've got to be thinking all the time about what's out there for triggers. Common natural triggers you'd think about, first it'd be load. Snowfall overnight, 30 centimeters, 50 centimeters, that's a lot of load. Wind loading, snow blowing onto a slope, that can trigger a slope. Sun coming on a slope, the slab gets weaker as it gets sun on it. It changes the surface of the snow. Rain on snow can be almost an instant avalanche trigger. Rain on snow gives you two things. It gives you new load and it gives you weakness. Cornices are those big overhangs of snow that form on the lee side of sharp ridges. Now those cornices break off now and then. When they roll down the hill, that's like rolling a Volkswagen down the hill or maybe a school bus down the hill sometimes. When Cornish chunks hit the slope, That's as good or better than a bomb hitting the slope. Rapid temperature change, rapid warming. That can trigger avalanches or make them easier for you to trigger. Rapid warming makes the snow weak, makes the slab easier to trigger. Common human triggers that we might see out here, well, that's us skiing or boarding down a slope through a starting zone. That's the most common human trigger. Or we're high marking with our sled, going right up into the starting zone. That's a pretty common human trigger these days. Or we're going to go and launch 10 meter, 20 meter, 30 meter cliff. You're going to hit the snow pretty hard. That's a pretty good test of that slope. Right now, I'm walking along on this meadow on a fairly firm crust. Fairly loose snow on the top, only about 10 centimeters, 5 centimeters. Doesn't tell me too much. But just back there in the trees, I fell through up to my waist in the facets. And we got some nice whoops in the sheltered part in the trees there. So you've got to be flexible. You got to see what you need to see when you get a chance to see it. There's a number of tests that you can do, simple, quick tests as you're traveling. The hand shear test, pull probe test, ski cut, jumping on a small roll, see if you can get it to go. Block tests, cutting off blocks of snow and rolling them down the hill. So hand shears are useful for the surface layers. They're quick. So I can just cut out a little block here right down through those two layers. Then I'm just going to stick my hand in here and see what happens. Oh, and I got a 7-planar shear on that lower layer. So with the pull probe test, all I'm doing here is poking down with my pole to see either changes as that goes down. And about this far down in these surface layers, it gets stiff and then softer. Boom! Just goes away to nothing. When you're traveling, you also want to think about your ski penetration or your foot penetration when you get off your skis when you stop. How far into the snow are you penetrating? If you're breaking trail up to your waist, you better know that there's a lot of unconsolidated snow around, and that could easily produce soft slab avalanches. But sometimes when you're traveling, you have a chance to go by little mushrooms of snow supported on rocks or tree stumps or on top of trees. You can poke around at those, and sometimes you'll see some of the snow break off. Get it a little bit more complicated, you can get into the snowpack, dig a snow profile, do things like compression tests. Whoop, there we go. Shovel shear test. The roots block test. You cut out a 2-meter wide block, 1.5 meters up the hill to create a kind of a mini slab that you can test with your skis. So I'm going to approach the block, step down, knee bend, a little jump. Whoa! Site selection is critical. Where you dig, where you look. So when we're building up our knowledge of the snow, you don't go out in the middle of a big line and dig a hole. That's not how you do it. You build up. Build your knowledge over time. Poke around. Look at some small spots. You have to remember that snowcraft takes time to learn. It's just like terrain. You got to get out there, you got to travel in the mountains, and you've got to practice. So it's a fine line making these decisions out there when you're traveling. It's not as if there's some angel looking over your shoulder who's going to protect you. You got to roll in a little caution, a margin of safety when you're traveling.